The flight was almost ready to leave the gate when it all started. Janet Morrison stood in front of 16-year-old Maya, her hands tightly gripping the inhaler like it was evidence of a crime. The hum of the plane's engines barely cut through the tension. "You can't bring street drugs on this plane," Janet said, her voice sharp, as if she'd just caught Maya red-handed. Maya's chest tightened. She could barely breathe. She felt it coming, the wheezing, the sharp, desperate pain in her lungs. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the inhaler, trying to explain between gasps, "I can't breathe without it." But Janet didn't move. Instead, she held the inhaler up in front of Maya's face like it was some sort of weapon. "Save the sob story," Janet snapped. She didn't even look at Maya's medical bracelet, the one that clearly identified her asthma. Maya could feel the air thickening around her. Her breaths were shallow, panicked, and with every second that passed, her world seemed to shrink. And the passengers. They were watching. Recording. Maya's hand shook as she reached out one more time, but Janet stood firm, unbothered by the life-and-death struggle playing out right in front of her. The cabin fell silent, every person waiting to see what would happen next. Maya's head began to spin. The inhaler was still out of reach. Maya's chest tightened even more. The air was leaving her, and she could feel the panic crawling up her throat. She fought for each breath, her fingers scraping the edge of her seat as she tried to hold herself together. "That's fake jewelry," Janet said dismissively, glancing at the medical bracelet that was supposed to tell the world what Maya needed. Maya's vision blurred. She gasped, her breath growing increasingly ragged. She couldn't explain it, she couldn't speak. Every word seemed trapped behind a wall of panic. She barely heard Janet's next words as the flight attendant continued to accuse her, as if Maya was a criminal in the middle of a game. The cabin was growing heavier by the second. Sweat beaded on Maya's forehead, and she could feel the blue tinge creeping over her lips. The signs were unmistakable, the asthma attack was getting worse. But then, someone, Tina Rodriguez, pulled out her phone, pointing it at Maya. She started streaming, her voice echoing out to the online world. "At Travelina here, and y'all need to see this discrimination happening right now on Delta Flight 447. Maya's phone buzzed in her lap. Her dad was calling. But her hands were too weak, too shaken to pick up. Janet was still holding the inhaler. It was close, but it felt so far away. Janet stood tall, almost mocking. "Either this medicine goes in the trash, or you get off my plane." The ultimatum was sharp, slicing through the cabin. Maya's heart raced. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The weight of it all, her life hanging by a thread, Janet's cruel dismissal, the cameras watching, felt like too much. The silence in the cabin stretched, every eye on Maya, her struggle, her desperation. Tina's phone screen flashed. The numbers kept climbing, 50, 100, 500 viewers, all witnessing the unfolding scene in real time. #Delta discrimination, Tina said aloud, the hashtag already spreading like wildfire, fueling the outrage from strangers watching in disbelief. Maya's phone buzzed again. It was her dad, again. She tried to answer, but her hand wouldn't obey her. Her vision was narrowing, the world around her slipping away. Janet saw the phone and smirked. "Right, I'm sure your people will be calling their lawyers," she sneered, her voice dripping with coldness. Maya's chest heaved painfully, her breathing sharp and shallow. The cabin had gone silent, save for the faint sound of her wheezing, growing louder by the second. And still, Janet stood unmoved, holding the inhaler. Then, from the back of the plane, an elderly man stood up. A retired doctor. He moved toward the front, pushing past the rows of startled passengers. "Excuse me, but that young lady is showing signs of severe respiratory distress. She needs immediate medical attention." Janet barely glanced at him, her response dismissive. "Stay seated, sir. This is a crew matter." But the murmurs around the cabin grew louder. More voices began to rise, passengers shifting in their seats, some leaning in to witness the chaos, others holding up their phones. Maya's breathing was becoming a blur of gasps, each one more desperate than the last. And in the back of her mind, there was one thought that kept repeating, "Please, just let me breathe." But what Maya didn't know, not yet, was that her father was already on his way to the airport. Could his arrival change everything, or was it too late? Maya's lungs were on fire. Each breath was a battle, and she was losing. Her chest rose and fell erratically, every inhale shallow and jagged. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, as if her body were slowly shutting down. Her lips began to tinge with blue, subtle at first, but unmistakable. Dr. Henry Chen was now standing at the front of the cabin, his voice cutting through the growing unease. "Excuse me, I'm a physician. That young lady is in serious respiratory distress. She needs her medication, immediately." Janet didn't even blink. "Stay seated, sir. This is a crew matter," she snapped, dismissing him with a flick of her wrist. Maya's vision was clouding over, the edges of her world growing fuzzy as the air grew thinner. The panic was real now. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Every passenger in the cabin could see it, the struggle, the fight for life, the desperation in Maya's eyes as she gasped for air. Phones flashed, cameras recording her every moment, the silence almost suffocating. Janet, still standing there, unmoved by the scene unfolding before her, didn't give an inch. Her protocol, her rules, were the only thing that mattered. The reality of the situation was undeniable. Maya's condition was growing worse with every passing second, but Janet, cold, indifferent, ignored it. And all Maya could do was pray. Pray for air, pray for her father, and pray for someone to see her as a person in need, not a problem to be solved. Maya's phone buzzed once more, but this time, it felt different. Her fingers, stiff and trembling, managed to swipe the screen. "Hello?" she gasped, barely able to get the word out. On the other end, the voice that spoke was calm, steady, and carried an authority that immediately commanded attention. "This is Captain Marcus Thompson, Delta Airlines employee number 7439. The air seemed to shift. The entire cabin felt it. Janet froze, her face paling as she processed the name. She knew who he was, every Delta employee did. The tone of his voice, the power in it, was unmistakable. This was no ordinary passenger. Maya's breathing, still labored, seemed to slow for a moment as she held the phone closer, her heart thudding harder in her chest. Captain Thompson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Janet, you're currently denying my daughter access to her prescribed asthma medication. Is that correct?" Janet's throat went dry. She couldn't answer immediately. The words stuck. The weight of what she'd done, of who was on the other end of the line, sank in. His next words came like a quiet command. "Return my daughter's medication. Now." Every eye in the cabin shifted from Janet to Maya, who was still clinging to the last shred of her strength. For the first time, there was a flicker of doubt in Janet's eyes. This wasn't just about protocol anymore. This was about something bigger. Maya, holding the phone, could barely manage a breath, but her heart, at least, felt a glimmer of hope. The phone call wasn't over. Captain Thompson's voice boomed through the cabin, cutting through the silence like thunder. "Janet Morrison, you are relieved of duty effective immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. The crew stood frozen, unable to look away, while Janet's face drained of color. She was still holding the inhaler, but now it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hand. Maya's breath was still coming in ragged gasps, but there was something else in the air now, something that felt like justice, or at least the start of it. Captain Thompson's next words hit harder. "You have potentially cost this company more than your lifetime earnings in 18 minutes. Every passenger in the cabin seemed to understand the full weight of his words. Janet's career was unraveling, her every move broadcast to millions of people watching live. Her mistake wasn't just a small slip, it was a public spectacle, and she was the one at the center of it. Maya's gaze shifted, from her father's steady voice on the phone to Janet, who stood there, trembling. The entire crew, everyone in the cabin, watched as Janet's authority, her pride, crumbled in real time. The live stream was still rolling, capturing every humiliating moment. Passengers were recording, watching as the once confident flight attendant fell apart. And as the world watched, Janet's fate was sealed. But what would she do next? Would she try to fight back? Or had she already lost everything? The tension in the cabin thickened, as if the very air was holding its breath. Every passenger's gaze was fixed on Janet, and even the crew seemed to brace for what would come next. Captain Thompson's voice rang out once more, calm but firm, a commanding presence that echoed throughout the plane. "Janet, you have two choices. Resign now with a neutral reference, or face termination, legal consequences, and a permanent blacklist from all major airlines. Your actions have violated federal regulations and cost this company dearly." The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. The seconds felt like minutes as Janet stood frozen, her hands shaking. Her career, her future, everything she had worked for, was teetering on the edge. Maya could barely hold her breath, watching as the woman who had caused her so much pain now faced the consequences of her own choices. "Make your decision, Janet," Captain Thompson's voice cut through the stillness, giving her no room for hesitation. The eyes of the cabin were on her. The silence stretched, unbearable, before Janet finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I resign from Delta Airlines, effective immediately." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of everything that had unfolded. Her pride, her career, gone in an instant. Maya couldn't look away. Janet's resignation wasn't just the end of a job, it was the end of her authority, her belief that she was untouchable. For the first time in the entire ordeal, there was no more cruelty in Janet's eyes. Only the quiet devastation of a woman who had lost it all. The weight of the moment finally settled, but it wasn't over yet. Captain Thompson's voice, steady and authoritative, cut through the lingering tension. "Delta Airlines formally apologizes for the treatment my daughter received today." His words were firm, and the cabin seemed to exhale in unison. A ripple of relief spread across the passengers, some nodding, others quietly applauding. The conflict was over, but its impact had just begun. The cabin erupted in applause, not just for the apology, but for the justice they had just witnessed. Maya, still sitting in her seat, felt something stir deep within her. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She wasn't just the girl fighting for her medication. She was something bigger now. A symbol of what accountability looked like. Of what could happen when someone was brave enough to stand up, even in the face of everything. Maya met her father's eyes, and in that moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. This wasn't just about her, this was about changing things, making sure no one else would ever be treated this way again. And as they sat there, reflecting on what had happened, Maya knew one thing: she had become part of something far greater than herself. But this story didn't end with just one career-ending moment. Captain Thompson's next moves would change the entire airline industry forever. Maya couldn't have imagined the ripple effect her ordeal would have. The moment the flight landed, the wheels were already in motion. Behind the scenes, things were changing. Delta Airlines, for all its power, had been forced to reckon with the fallout from what had happened on Flight 447. Maya's experience had exposed a glaring flaw in their system. And now, policies were shifting. Effective immediately, Captain Thompson explained to Maya one evening as they sat together, all flight attendants are now required to undergo 40 hours of medical device recognition training. We're also implementing a new system for passengers to register their medical conditions and devices when they check in. Maya listened quietly, amazed at how quickly the airline was adapting. Policies that had been in place for years were now being rewritten. "Your 18 minutes of hell are going to protect thousands of passengers," her father said, his voice thick with both pride and frustration. It wasn't just Delta that took notice. Other airlines, seeing the backlash, began adopting similar measures. What had happened to Maya was no longer a one-off incident, it had sparked a revolution. The way the industry approached passenger rights, particularly for those with medical needs, was never going to be the same. Maya's story had become a catalyst for change, pushing the industry to address its ignorance and biases. She wasn't just a passenger anymore, she was a force of nature, demanding accountability from every corner. And this was just the beginning. What started with one girl's fight for her inhaler was now protecting the rights of thousands, and changing the world around her. Maya stood before the congressional subcommittee, the weight of her journey heavy in her chest. The room was packed, every seat filled, every eye focused on her. She had come a long way from that day on Flight 447, from the girl gasping for air and fighting for her life to this moment, where her voice had become a beacon of change. She took a deep breath and began. "What happened to me wasn't just about an inhaler or an airline. It was about recognizing the humanity of every passenger, regardless of appearance, background, or medical condition." Maya spoke passionately, recounting how her experience had led to sweeping changes in Delta Airlines, changes that were now influencing the entire industry. Her ordeal had forced the airline to adopt new policies, from medical device recognition training for all flight attendants to a more transparent and accountable system for passengers with medical needs. Her story had become more than just a personal tragedy, it was a turning point for corporate accountability. Maya's fight had inspired reforms in the airline industry, and her name was now synonymous with justice, equality, and resilience. "One person's courage," she said, her voice steady and strong, "can create lasting change." The room fell silent. Her words rang through the chamber, a powerful reminder of the strength one person could hold in the face of injustice. But just as Maya prepared to wrap up her testimony, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her heart skipping a beat. It was a call she wasn't expecting. The urgency in the tone was undeniable. Maya answered, her breath catching in her throat as the words came through, words that could change everything. The world was watching, waiting, and the twist had just begun. Would this unexpected turn threaten the legacy she had worked so hard to build? If you've been inspired by Maya's journey, by her courage and resilience, make sure you hit subscribe. Like this video to show your support for the fight against injustice and corporate negligence. And leave a comment below, share your thoughts on Maya's story and how it sparked a movement. Have you witnessed a moment that changed everything? Let's keep the conversation going. Because, just like Maya, we all have the power to create change.